8 people were killed when attackers tried to force their way into the army base near the Aden Adde International Airport in Somalia's Mogadishu. 2 of those killed are assailants linked to militant group Alshabab. The group has already claimed responsibility for the attack. The nationalities of the other casualties have not yet been established. Officials immediately suspended flights from the Aden Adde International Airport, which also hosts peacekeepers, United Nations offices, and diplomatic missions. Right. For more on this, we are joined now by international relations expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala. Dr. Sinkala, good evening. Good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. Talk to me about the significance of this attack and the node which Al-Shabaab is focusing on here for this attack.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Tabo, and good evening to your listeners and the viewers. Look, it is quite unfortunate that, Africa has failed to understand and dissect the conflicts which are happening in Africa. Not only in that region, we can see how the escalation of the terrorist movements, the Al-Shabaab and the Al-Qaeda, who has been reported to, from bombing political opponents and others, and as well as, on the government level, we have seen how the division is between the president and the prime minister. Which of course we've got third parties which are involved trying to support the latter, who is the prime minister, and creating that confusion. I think, the region organizations which has been entrusted, to mediate in terms of diplomatic negotiations, not to escalate conflicts, has been part of these conflicts which are escalating on the continent. And, the legitimizing as well of the Al-Shabaab and the Al-Qaeda, who are even now being interviewed, who are claiming that they are liberation movements. It's quite concerning on the continent. But we can see that the paradigm shift has shifted in relation to the conflicts within Russia and Ukraine, and how South Africa has turned around to look at it logically, and coming out and trying to say, no, we're not going to take sides, but we support one country, and this is not an invasion of Ukraine, but it's conflicts between the two countries and the West. Somalia as well has been, torn by, Al-Qaeda and the Al-Shabaab militants, who are profit-making terrorist organizations funded by well-known organizations and countries in the world, who are actually impeding the democratic dispensation or dynamics to take place.
This is a heavily fortified, area of the Somali capital. What does this say, firstly, about the security forces inside the country in responding to terrorist incidents?
Look, of course, there is incapacitation in terms of advancing or even trying to counter, attack or prevent or put in some security measures, to combat those escalations of these terrorist movements. They are actually bigger. They are well funded, as compared to countries. Yes, we have seen the escalation of military budgets on the continent, especially in the war-torn zones, has increased almost to 30%. We talk about Algeria. The last report, in terms of economical budgets on military expenditure, it's almost $13 billion, where you're looking at areas like Mali, where there's conflicts as well there, and there are places on the continent, they are in the ranges of 700 on average of $375 million. So it's a lucrative business where one Tabo will tell you in the morning to come and sell you security, but in the night one comes and steals your products. So you'll be compelled to come and buy those security products. And this is how now the peddlers of these conflicts are playing.
Now, Al-Shabaab's aim in these attacks, is it clear? What do we know they aim to achieve by toppling the Somalian government?
Look, it is it's just actually the bait that they are playing, the peddlers of these conflicts. They're actually trying to create a confusion to lower countries, especially these poor countries, to increase their budgets, and they'll come up with solution that, we shall protect you from either coup d'etats or we shall protect your citizens. And none of these conflicts in the war-torn zones on the continent has ever enjoyed that protection from the so-called pedras of these conflicts. These Alshabab and the resurgences of the conflicts through these terrorist organizations who are funded, they have served no purpose. And the lack of teeth from organizations such as United Nations, who are now complicit in terms of looking at the conflicts. We can see how they reacted towards the Russia-Ukraine conflicts, where they decided to be the judge and the investigator and to take sides instead of looking at it, and as well as the results from the International Criminal Court, which found Russia to be guilty of aggression, crimes against humanity, and so on and so forth, which is happening. And unfortunately, until we look at the whole conflict scenario on the continent and those who are funding these conflicts and those who are inviting this conflict and militants, especially private and military who has the ISIS and the Peace and Security Council report has always identified that they are the ones who are actually causing these conflicts on the continent. We shall continue looking at it as just from an angle that will fail to resolve the conflicts on the continent.
Yeah. From the players involved, international players involved point of view, who is in Somalia? I mean, you've got some Chinese nationals there. Who is calling the shots in that part of the continent?
I can think of many, who've got interest in that region in terms of military contractors. Russia as well, they are tendering for that military construction as a contractor to supply security and defense to that country. But I think the key role players, it's the United States of America. We can remember, Tabo, that a month ago, United States of America Under Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he actually put some sanctions on some political officials who do not support the agenda and escalation to that nation. Hence, some governments and the presidents of such countries like that, they are installed by those who would like to benefit, from these conflicts. But in an event that they are being blocked from taking that advancement, they shall create confusion to make the people turn against their own elected government to divide the nation until they are given what they want. We can see how the military has taken over in the western region of Africa, especially Mali, where they are actually refusing to hand over the power to the civilian rule because during that a state of emergency time and suspending of the constitution, the military are in charge and they can decide whatever which they can do. And in that case, they have kicked out France and they have started working with Russia to provide them peace and security in inverted commas, which Africa has never actually enjoyed.
So, Dr. Sinkala, I mean, essentially what you're saying, we are likely to see organizations like Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, stepping up attacks of this nature in complex and indirect ways, unless we are properly getting behind the analysis of what is behind these conflicts.
Of course. They're actually getting more powerful. Just next door here in South Africa, Mozambique, we have seen how they have taken over the northern part, knowing that they are there, the United Nations Security Council, as well as regional blocs in the southern bloc, they've got little things to do, in terms of fighting against them because they are more powerful. But look, not all things are bad at this stage. We can see now the agitators of change who are looking at these conflicts in a logistic and logical manner. As you can see, President Cyril Ramaphosa has come out very openly, to speak against organizations such as the United Nations Security Council, in the way they handle conflicts on the continent. Now we would no longer be depending on the regional or continental organization. I think individual countries now will decide that this is actually right for countries, as we saw in the Security Council votes, which we had about 25%, abstained from voting, and others voted against the motion that they should reprimand Russia. So we are seeing a change, a paradigm shift, like I've mentioned earlier, Tavo, that now will be countries alone will be deciding in terms of peace and security. And I think that would be good for Africa once individual countries do not depend on these organizations which has failed them time and again after time.
Yeah. How do we see peaceful resolution to conflict without a regional approach, particularly if we're looking at countries fighting amongst each other within the continent?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge. And I think Africa, I was speaking to somebody, I think we need to change the name Africa. You must remember, if you study philosophy and those who've done law, they will understand that Africa, the name itself was imposed, and Africa means the experience by the Europeans when they took over Africa, especially from the northern part of the Maghreb, and the experience that they had of the climate of the continent. The name of Africa is actually Ubuntu, working together and having a common goal in society to achieve something. And I think once we realize our identity and we believe in ourselves and we believe locally, then we shall stop inviting these who are so-called Mother Teresa dressed in high-heel shoes or black suits, trying to pretend to portray a picture of peace and security on the continent. Because most of the conflicts on the continent, if you think about it, they are imported from somewhere, be it diseases and be it military escalation. One wonders also, how do the arms and ammunition passes through the border control, the customs, and these get empowered? We can see as well how Nigeria, the biggest economy on the continent, has failed to tackle the Boko Haram, who has taken part of the country, and everything is like it's normal. They've kidnapped young girls and they've done whatever crimes against humanity. But at nowhere we have seen countries such as the United States of America who claim that they would like to institute peace and security on the continent to come in aid of that, to make that diplomatic mediation and negotiations take precedence. But we can see they only supply aid like what they are supplying aid in terms of military equipment to Ukraine. And eventually what we see is devastating results, that those arms and ammunition and bombs, they're actually killing citizens instead of protecting them from being killed.
What do you say then is the remedy for what you call this inappropriate pursuit of self-interest by international communities on the African continent? How do we deal with that?
I think if we change the way we're thinking, in the continent, that we believe in ourselves, and I think they shall respect us more. And I think the other thing is we must say no to the aid on the continent. That aid, which is called also known as assistance in distress, Africa is not distressed. Some of these aids which comes here, we don't actually need it. It actually exacerbates the conflicts on the continent, and it divides us. And in pursuit of a democratic dispensation on the continent, as we pursue, we shall have to review the elections. We must review our governance. We must review the way we think, from thinking in the Western culture to start thinking philosophically in the culture of Africans. And from there now we shall have boundaries. And once we have boundaries with the West, then we shall be more powerful. And once you stay united, instead of voting two countries such as my country, Zambia, voting to reprimand Russia, and South Africa making a U-turn to support Russia, that inconsistency on the continent, that's where now these so-called multinational layers, especially from the West, it takes advantage in that division, and they come up with certain things that looks like a solution, but in the long run, there hasn't been any solutions from them.
Dr. Charles Sinkala, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on tonight on In Focus. They're helping us in that conversation. International relations expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala.